Hello everyone, welcome to part 2 of the Quilter's Coat Rag Jacket Texas Mink make. This is the second video and today we'll be showing you sleeves. And again, if you do sew this jacket, make sure that when you try on your sweatshirt that it's going to be a size too big because you are going to lose a little bit of sizing in the arms. This sweatshirt was way bigger than my last sweatshirt, so also keep that in mind. Basically, you're just going to cut up the serged seam of the underarm all the way from the cuff of the sleeve through the banding all the way to the armpit. And I'm cutting it. I'm trying to be careful to stay on one side of the seam because that seam wants to roll with the scissors. Actually, it doesn't really matter. Just cut, and then you'll have to go back and trim. I was trying to make it where it was a clean cut for the seam to where when I went back to trim that out, it would just be easy on one side, and the seam kept rolling. So do your best, but do cut out the excess bulk of this seam. It's not necessary to have. You're trimming about 1/4 of an inch off each side. It's you're losing very little width of the sleeve. And then later on when we go to sew it back up, you're going to set your stitch width. And you'll probably lose about 1/2 inch on the sleeve after you've already lost 1/4 inch of the sleeve. So that's a pretty big difference. What we're trying to do is we're trying to open up the sleeve so that you don't have to use your free arm part of your machine. Not all machines have a free arm, so I was trying to make this as easy as possible, but you'll see later in the video that we will have to use the free arm because the sew gets really tricky the higher up you get on the sleeve. Okay, now notice that the bottom edge of this is gathered. You will need to take note of that when you sew your first strip on. It's very similar to sewing that strip on just like we did to the bottom of the jacket, but you're going to have to pull that banding tight, because if you don't, you might get a pucker in your jacket sleeve. I did not get a pucker, but I almost got a pucker, and I was amazed that even though I was sewing on a flat surface and holding my fabric taut, that it still wanted to do that on the underside. So just be aware of that. And we're just going to basically sew this just how we've sewn all of our other strips on to this point. I'm using the cuff of the sleeve as a anchor point to know how to space my fabric strip. I'm using that fabric strip is about at the halfway mark, right over the banding of that seam. And just like what we did before, we're going to trim off our excess of our strip, and then we are going to snip our fringe before we move on. Technically, you can sew all your strips on the jacket and then go back and fringe it, but those fringe strips, because you're starting at the bottom and layering it over the bottom each time you sew, they will get in the way. So you really need to create your fringe as you go. And I'm just snipping randomly. How far do you need to snip up the strip? It doesn't really matter. And here I am making a few snips at the top because I know that I have not gauged that properly, and that will end up causing a little bit of shredding in this washing machine. So by making those snips, it will shred and rag rather than tangle up and leave a long thread mess. So if you don't get to the edge of it, I recommend doing that. That was the only part on the jacket that I actually did that. So it was just me not paying attention to how I was sewing. And lo and behold, here's the back side. And you'll kind of see there in the middle how I got almost a pucker. The rest of this you'll sew as normally until you get to the top of the sleeve. I am to the last part of this sleeve, and I might have 2 strips left to sew. And it's getting really tricky here at the armpit, so I have taken my free arm and I will utilize that. Looks like I'm only gonna maybe do 1.5. I don't know, we'll see. Let me see here. And I'm trying to prevent anything from buckling up so that I can get this as cleanly sewn as possible without accidentally sewing something I'm not supposed to, and that has happened once. I can tell I've got my seam here and there's nothing underneath here. And this is probably going to be the hardest part of the jacket, is wrestling with this portion right here. The good news is that a lot of this fabric is going to end up in the armpit, and so if you can't sew all the way down here, it's fine because it's not going to show. And I think right now at this point, I've actually used 3 yards of fabric. So if you are a plus size, you probably will need more than 3 yards. If you're like an XL or less, you'll probably just need 3 or less. I'm going to push all that out of the way. like I'll need one more strip, and then this side will be done, and we'll sew up the armhole. This is where it gets exciting. Actually, it might be more than one. Yep, more than one at the back. Okay, I'm getting to the back, and I want to pull my other pieces out of the way so I don't sew over them. And I'm almost right at that seam. There's going to be a little bit of a gap. And right here is the top of my shoulder. And yeah, it looks like I still need one more piece. If you're not sure of if you should sew anymore, I'm not going to sew anything right there. I'm probably going to come up and sew some over the cap of the shoulder. Because this is the armpit, it's going to be in the fold of my arm. It's not going to show, and that little spot is very, very tricky. So I think I'm just going to pin that so it doesn't move. Load that back up. And I pulled my string out. Machine is ghost sewing. There, it does that. It's got something caught in the foot, and that's why it does it. Okay, so if you look, I'm sewing directly on the seam line of the shoulder seam of the jacket. And I'm trying to move my my other pieces out of the way. I don't know. That's the frustrating part of this machine. It's old. Okay. Put that right there. I am at the cap of the sleeve now, very top. And I'm sewing over my other pieces, and I'm probably going to stop right here. If my machine will stop. All right, the sleeve is sewn. All right, let me reposition the camera. Okay, my last snippings on this side. Can you leave gaps and show your sweatshirt? Yes, you can. Doesn't really matter. This is how I want to go with this one. My other two, I did not do that. All right, so I've got the whole sleeve sewn, so I'm going to turn the jacket inside out. At this time would be good to trim all of the threads that you may have loose. Yeah, I think I've still got these threads on my other jacket. The thread lasted longer than the sweatshirt, believe it or not. All right. I am going to bring right sides together, and I'm going to try and capture all of my fringe in there. And I'm going to pin. And yes, there you can see where I've actually accidentally sewed over fabric, and it's on the inside, so I just cut it out. This is a rag jacket. It'll just add provenance to it. Okay. Just gonna sew through all of these layers by bringing these raw edges together. And when I say raw edges of the sweatshirt. And I will be trimming some of this up. I'm gonna also set my stitch to something other than a straight stitch. I'm gonna do like an overlock stitch for this, even though this is not gonna fray or unravel. If you have a serger, this would be a good serger thing. And I also am not gonna sew this at, I'm not gonna sew this at a 5/8 inch seam allowance. I'm not gonna worry about that. I am just gonna capture the sweatshirt in an overlock stitch. So let's see. All right, let me see. Zigzag, multiple zigzag, overcasting. I think that's the opposite of what I want. There we go. Double over edge stitch, overlock stitch. That's what I'm gonna use. Okay. So after you get done sewing this, you will want to cut through all of the excess, which is quite a workout for the hands. Because I've overlock stitched that, it's going to capture those threads and it will fray, but it's not going to fray that bad. So let's open this up. If you so choose, you can also flip your cuff up and stitch it down. I'm not going to do that. I may wait and as this wears out, put a new cuff on it. Let me see. Okay, let's find where we just sewed. Right down here. Captured most of that in the seam allowance. And again, this is the armpit. I don't have very much fabric there because when this is my shoulder seam, that's totally not going to show. And let me put this on and take a picture. So this has really good movement, and I'm really getting excited because I only have one sleeve left on this to see how it's going to react in the wash machine. Right now, if the wind gently blows, it moves my longer fringe. I did make this fringe longer. Usually I make it about 1.5 inches, and on this one I made it 2 inches, and I'm really liking the effect. It was a whole lot less work because you have less fabric strips and you have less sewing, if that makes any sense. I'm really liking how this turned out. And there's the sleeve, and you cannot see any white of the jacket except right there in my armpit. So after I get the sleeve done, then I will come and I will bind the front. So this is the sleeve video, and the very last video will be the binding of the front. I'll show that next. Thanks for watching.